know you're getting old when you make notes about your own life, so that's probably not a great start. But anyway, I was asked to speak a little bit about my career, which is mostly at UBC, and share a little bit of challenges and opportunities and how I turn challenges into opportunities along the way. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do in the next 15 or 20 minutes or so. So first I'll just start by telling you just a little bit about myself. And honestly, engineering was probably always in my future, or my, from a very, very early stage. And I'm told that when I was 2, I used to say, I can do it by myself. And that's never changed. I'm always trying to do things myself, fix things, and that's, everybody in my family knows me for that. My dad should have been an engineer, and my mom was a nurse, and so if you put those two things together, you get biomedical engineering, which is what, as a younger person, I thought I wanted to do. The other reason biomedical engineering is better than medicine is because I get really queasy around all things medical. So that was the other thing that made, well, engineering maybe is the right direction for me. So I went off and I did engineering at Queen's University. I did an undergraduate degree in engineering physics because when I was an undergraduate, biomedical engineering was only a graduate opportunity. There was no undergraduate programs, not in Canada anyway. And then I came out to UBC to do a master's degree with my supervisor, Charles Laszlo, who was very well known in the biomedical community. And I finished my master's with him. And during that time, I also got married. And so my original plan was to come to UBC and do a master's for 2 years and go away again. And, well, the master's took me 3 years, and I certainly wasn't going away again because now I was married, and my husband was at UBC, and he was in the audience. And so here I am still. So moving right along, one of my first challenges, I would say, is I started a PhD. And I sort of thought during my PhD I should do other things. I should get some experiences, and I think that's probably really good advice still today, because I think about 20% of people who finish a PhD these days actually stay within the academy, and most end up going out into industry or doing other things. So at the time I thought, well, I should do some consulting, and I should learn some things about other projects, and I also started doing some teaching. And our first child also came along, so I was also trying to juggle that as well, which I thoroughly enjoyed. As a result of that, I wasn't making the same kind of progress on my PhD that I really wanted to. All the other things were great, but the PhD was going kind of slowly and kept getting pushed a little further back and a little further back. And eventually I realized that it really just wasn't going anywhere, so I stopped. I withdrew from the PhD program. Which was a difficult thing to do at the time. But I actually started doing more teaching because in all those experiences I discovered that teaching, I enjoyed it quite a lot, and I seemed to be fairly good at it. And at that time the department actually was growing, and they started hiring people as instructors as opposed to sort of research track faculty people, and I was able to get a full-time position in that. So I became an instructor, and the next step up was tenure and senior instructor, and that takes about 5 years. And so 5 years later, we also had our second child in the middle of all of that, and I got tenure and promotion and became a senior instructor here at UBC in the electrical and computer engineering department. It was called by then. So of the various life lessons that I have in here, that's number one, which is things don't really happen like you pictured. I had a really, really clear idea when I was young, and it didn't really turn out that way in those sort of middle years. But you know what, that's okay, because I was enjoying what I was doing. I was doing well at what I was doing, and what else could you ask for, really? There was one downside to sort of the track I was in, which is that it kind of ended there, if you will. Being a senior instructor, there wasn't any rank above that. There wasn't much in the way of other opportunities. Teaching was sort of the main thing at the time. And so, even though I thoroughly enjoy teaching and still do to this day, it kind of felt like there was nothing new happening. And what I did notice was that a few of the instructors in my department, with the same sort of rank that I had they'd had some other opportunities. They'd been associate head or something like that. Or some sort of position that I guess you would call administrative. So I thought maybe that would be something kind of interesting, but really didn't know how do you get one of those positions. There didn't seem to be any kind of process. They just kind of sprung up and got announced all of a sudden, I guess. So I grumbled a bit one day about that, and then I thought, and then another such appointment was announced, and I thought, well, what do you do about that? So I went to my head and I said, so how does that work? How come all of a sudden there's people with positions, and how do I get one of those positions, I suppose? He said, I didn't know you were interested. And I said, well, nobody asked me. So he said, okay, next time one of these comes along, do you want to be told about it? And I said, absolutely. So life lesson number 2 is if you are interested in something, you gotta go tell people about it because, well, they're not gonna come looking for you. And my head was actually very true to his word, and not that far later, a few months later really, he came along and he said, guess what, they're looking for an associate dean. And I said, oh, that's a little more than I bargained for, but okay, that sounds good. So I said, yeah, sure, tell the dean I'm interested. And the dean, some weeks later, all of a sudden wanted to see me. Wanted to see me on a Friday in the middle of summer when I booked a day off to go to a wedding. And so I said, I can't come in today, I'm going to a wedding. And the dean said, I don't care, I need to see you today. I said, oh, well, okay. So when I went, and I did make it to the wedding, so that was all good. And it turned out becoming associate dean was sort of a thing where, you know, somebody asked you and you sort of had a bit of an appointment with them, and they decided that maybe this would work out, and next thing you know, or a few months later, actually it took a while, I was an associate dean. And so there's another life lesson in there, which is sometimes you just can't say no. I'm too busy, or maybe next time, because you don't always get a second opportunity. My sense at the time was if I said, no, I'm not really interested in that one, that would be the end of it. Nobody would ever ask me again if I wanted to have an administrative position. So, you know, sometimes that's, like, this is a more humorous version of that because it was kind of comical the way I had to sort of race off away from the wedding and, you know, kind of go off and do this. But I think that's true in a lot of cases when it comes to, you know, being asked to review a grant or be, you know, chair a conference or take on, chair some sort of large committee or large piece of work. Sometimes you just have to, even though you don't know where you're going to find the time to do it, you sort of have to do that if you want to advance in your career. You just have to kind of make the time for it. So that's, you know, a piece of advice that somebody gave me once, and I sort of pulled that deer. So there I was, a brand new associate dean, and the first thing I learned in the dean's office was there was a fair bit of tension in the dean's office, and people weren't that happy. And 9 months in, the dean that hired me decided she wanted to pursue some other opportunities. And she went on to do some very interesting things. But in the meantime, all the other associate deans but one had turned over. And within another 9 months, so a year and a half in, I was the longest serving associate dean. Which is not exactly how I pictured that either. I, for a while, called my position associate dean of things that fall out of the sky. It really was associate dean academic, but things just landed, right? With all of this turnover, every week there seemed to be some new thing that people didn't really know who was supposed to do it, or when it was supposed to happen, or how big of a thing it was. And so I just ended up catching these things and trying to juggle them as best as I could. And that was a pretty challenging time, because at times it was like, you know, the work kept piling up, and you know, I wasn't entirely sure when you're doing each of these things for the first time, you know, am I doing it right? But I learned a lot. I learned a lot quickly by being thrown into those situations. And some of the important things that, you know, I take away from that is, first of all, when those sorts of things happen, you have to ask questions and get help from people and find out what other people know about whatever it is you've been asked to do. You have to be observant, I think. You have to look around and see how other people do things and form your own opinions about that. And that's what I did a lot. If I had gone to meetings that ran really well, I think to myself, how did that person run that meeting? That was really effective. Another meeting that didn't run so well, I'd say, well, maybe I don't want to do it that way. And I actually call that silent mentoring. I don't know if that's a real name for anything, but what I mean by that is I look at other people and how they do things and how other people perceive that and try to learn from that. And the other thing I learned in that time, which was, I think, really important, is I ended up making a lot of decisions that affect other people. So student issues, staff issues, you get reports of all sorts of things where somebody is upset about something and something has to be done, something hasn't been done properly and it has to be fixed. Scholarships have to be adjudicated, all those sorts of things, and all of those things affect people. And really the golden rule there is to make sure that you're trying to get as much as you can all sides of a story or a situation before you make a decision about what to do. And really it is a case of things that engineers apply every day, which is gradual escalation, trying to take one step at a time and figure out how to solve a problem causing the best outcome for everybody and the least amount of negative consequences. So those are sort of two key things that I think, those are the key things that I take with me every day when I have to solve some new problem, and they land in my office all the time. There's no two ways about it. Now the good thing about this, with all these different pieces of different portfolios landing on my desk, was that as things started to settle out a little bit, I got to choose what pieces of the portfolio really made sense for me to keep, what were well aligned with my interests and my knowledge base, and what things maybe other people should do as things were reorganized. And at exactly the same time as I began as an associate dean, the university actually created a new position called Professor of Teaching, which had not existed at UBC ever, and really didn't exist too much anywhere else. And I have to give credit to UBC for that. So they had trying to create parallel ranks between a research stream and a teaching or an educational leadership stream. And so there were a lot of expectations for people who might become a professor of teaching. Maintaining an active teaching portfolio was one, and contributing to education in a significant way, usually including some component outside of the university or beyond your classroom, beyond your department, and even beyond your university, was an expectation for being eligible and actually being approved as being a professor of teaching. So it's somewhat something like the promotion process for going from associate to full professor, and these were the conditions. And so that was a challenge. I had to say, if I was interested in this, I wanted to try and advance and attain that rank, and yet I had all of this administrative portfolio at the same time. So the question is, how do I try and do both of those things at the same time? And the answer for me was to try to continue to align my portfolio with things that serve both purposes. So things that were beneficial to my faculty, that helped developing curriculum, working on policy, working on admissions, those sorts of things. Those were all things that helped our programs. But they were also things where I could have an influence and an impact. And so those are the things I focused on. I ran for Senate, actually, because I was sitting on Senate committees, and I sort of wanted to see where all those papers go when you're finished in the subcommittees, and so I joined Senate and got very involved with admissions. So admissions at UBC at the undergraduate level is something that has actually changed a fair bit over the last few years. We look at a much broader range of things, and that's something that I've been able to have an influence, and which I think is a positive influence because it looks at students, incoming potential students, in a different way and takes more of what they've done during their high school years into account. We're looking for well-rounded students, and this is a way to try and achieve that. So I've had an impact there in the university. The curriculum, our first-year engineering program, we made some very significant changes, and I was able to be the person who helped push for the structural changes at the dean's office level. So that was the administrative part. But then I actually, because I was active in the classroom, was able to be part of the team that helped create the new content and deliver it. So I got to see it from beginning to end, and it's actually, and I was able to publish some of the work that we've done. As a team, we published all sorts of different modules, and other universities across the country are actually using some of those modules, which is, I think, a great thing that we can share what we've learned across the country with other engineering schools. As a part of that, I've also been able to work with people from across other departments at UBC that I never would have had an opportunity to work with otherwise, and work with other people up through the administration that I never would have had a chance to meet or get to know otherwise. So all of these have been both interesting, but they also developed or allowed me to build skills and work towards professor teaching at the same time as contribute things to my faculty. One of the other third piece, which really goes outside of the university, is looking at accreditation. And engineering accreditation in Canada is a very robust system. It's a very high quality system, but it's a very rigid system. And very traditional in many ways. And so I've been working with people across the country to try and advocate for certain reforms that would give us more flexibility to allow students to have more experiential options, to have changes to their curriculum that they are looking for, and to maintain or preserve the accreditation for all of our programs at the same time. So those are sort of the things that, one of the biggest challenges was balancing all that, but that was my strategy for trying to accomplish on both sides. And the good news is it worked out pretty well. In sort of 2016, 2017, in that academic year, I actually did become a professor of teaching. And that does bring me more or less in my portfolio up to the present day. It's been a pretty steady state over the last couple of years. So, I think I would close with saying that, sometimes things actually are serendipitous and work out. The idea of the professor of teaching was something I had no idea about, and yet there it was, and I, at the end of the day, sort of became a professor in a very different way than I had originally intended, but all the same. And, think I've been able to make some nice contributions to our educational system, our engineering programs at UBC, and contributions that have actually been adopted at other schools. And so I guess the message out of that is, and a message that we give our first-year students, is it doesn't so much matter, your path. It's never as direct as you think it's going to be. But if you're choosing things that you like, and if you're choosing things that where you're making an impact and a contribution, these things do tend to work out. And so then it does become a little bit more the journey rather than the end. But I think the two still do sort of converge at the end if you're not so focused on a single goal, but you're willing to take opportunities or look for opportunities as they come along and be open-minded about those opportunities. So I get the sense that my time is up. But thank you very much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the next speakers and the dinner, and I'll be over there. I can answer questions later if you'd like. Thank you very much.